election. Bob Clark, along with Dale Cornelius, our producer here on 96.3 News Radio KKOB. And looking at the calendar, 3 weeks from tomorrow, absentee voting gets underway before expanded early voting and then Election Day on Tuesday, November 4th here in the city of Albuquerque. And at the top of the ballot is the race for mayor. Incumbent Tim Keller is trying to win an unprecedented third straight term, and there are 6 challengers on the ballot who are trying to unseat him. And we have our first interview with one of the challengers, as we will be reaching out to all of the candidates here in the coming weeks. But we'll begin today with Alex Uballez, who is the former U.S. attorney here in the state of New Mexico and now running for mayor. And if you have any questions for Alex, you can send us a text message at 505-243-3333. Alex, it's good to see you. How you doing today?
I love being number one. Thanks for having me on, Bob. Looking forward to it.
Absolutely. So why don't we start with this? We'll talk a little bit about your background. And obviously, you know, it's interesting. I'm not sure how many people, in terms of name recognition, I'm not sure how much of that you enjoyed while you were the U.S. attorney, because I think most people probably didn't even know you were the U.S. attorney until the APD DWI scandal became public, and we found out about that investigation. Then you were doing a lot of media, and of course that was at headlines for well over a year and a half here in the Albuquerque area. So why don't we start with that? When you were the U.S. attorney, what was the first moment that your office started to get wind of some of the allegations that were going on, to the point where and then it finally became public when the search warrants were executed?
Yeah, it's such an interesting point. So when I was even in the process to be considered for U.S. attorney, it was a thing that it took my mom several months of Googling to figure out exactly what the position was, and that I wasn't just going to work for Raul Torres at the AG's office, but in fact be a political appointee. And so it's a little known position, but that's the reason why when I was U.S. attorney, I accepted every interview, right? And you can talk with any one of your colleagues in the media and you'll know, whenever they had a question, I would go on and answer it. I couldn't always give the facts of what happened, and there's really good reasons for that, right? Because when we're in law enforcement, you don't want to tell people who you're investigating before you knock down their door.
Sure, makes sense.
Right? You don't want to tell people and give them the heads up that you're on to them. But my policy was that I'll give them the information I could, or I would explain why I couldn't. Because I think this is really important for people, not only to know who their government is, what they are doing, but that they are doing things, and when they can't share things with you is for a reason. And so I preface that with saying I can't tell you when I learned about the DWI scandal, and I can't tell you the process that happened inside of the office to investigate it. But what I can talk about is what is public, which is we went overt about a little over a year and a half ago, which means that's when we are knocking on doors and collecting evidence and doing interviews, and that's when the public first learns of it. But I'm an experienced organized crime investigator, which means, it's different from a DA, a U.S. attorney, and an AUSA, an assistant United States attorney. They actually participate in the investigation of crimes, right? The DA is a lawyer who receives a case from APD or whatever law enforcement agency puts together for the courts. As an organized crime investigator, what we actually do is lead proactive investigations into criminal syndicates, into organized crime, into public integrity, and build these cases over years. And so the day the public learned about it was not the day we learned about it.
Sure. No, absolutely. But it definitely falls into that organized crime realm, does it not? I mean, it's very similar to how the mob operates in a RICO case, right?
And we brought RICO charges for that reason.
Yeah, very good. Alex Baez with us here on 96.3 News Radio KKOB. So obviously we had a change in presidential administrations, and you serve at the pleasure of the president. So you ultimately ended up resigning and leaving as the U.S. attorney. At what point were you thinking about what your next move might be that ultimately led you to announce a run for mayor?
So the hardest thing about making the decision to put my hat in to be United States attorney was the fact that I knew it would mean that my tenure at Department of Justice was going to end. So when I graduated law school, when I was looking at what I could do with my law degree, how I can help the community the most, my dream job was to be a federal prosecutor. And my hope for my career was to end it out retiring from a U.S. attorney's office. And so I remember I applied 3 times to this office. I was so excited when I got the job. And I thought that that's where I would stay for the rest of my career, because it's good and righteous work, and it keeps the people of New Mexico safe. And it's also the highest quality of attorneys and the highest quality of practice in the state. And so when I was considering whether or not even to be considered for this position, there was a bit of heartache because I knew there would be an end. Mm-hmm. But I knew there would be an end, right? I think there's a lot of talk and politicization about like the firing of U.S. attorneys, and I'll say there was a time when it wasn't this politicized, and I think that was a better time. However, I went into this knowing that I'd be fired, right? That was the inevitable end of this road for me. I didn't know what I was going to do, honestly. During the final months of my tenure, we were struggling through restrictions on hiring, restrictions on funding. We were trying to keep the office afloat while delivering the same high quality of services to the people of New Mexico. And so during my final months, I was sprinting it out to the finish line, trying to make the office, as always, better than it was before, trying to support the people who are working there and trying to keep the people of New Mexico safe. The first 2 weeks after I left that office, I'll always remember because I was angry. I was furious. I was full of all of this pent-up energy and anxiety from 15 years in law enforcement, where every day, every week, right, these were 80-hour weeks. These were dealing with some of the worst things of our community. I started my career as a crimes against children prosecutor, right? These are some of the most horrific things that happen here. And as a crimes against children prosecutor, we used to go out and call outs every time a child was murdered in the city, right? And so going from, always on, all the time, the phone calls only come when it is the worst thing that's happening and there is no right call, to silence, to being on the outside of it, right? To not being able to help anymore, but also jumping from that 120 miles per hour to zero, I think for any human being is difficult. And so I took a few weeks with my children who, had shared their father with this state for so long. And I, reflected on my career. I thought about, the work that I had done. And I took a lot of lessons away from my time in the criminal justice system. And that helped inform me on this next step, which is, what can I do to better protect this community? And the answer is, be its mayor.
Now, the shift into politics from being in the U.S. Attorney's Office and being a prosecutor, it's a very different realm. So what's that adjustment been like for you, especially when it comes to asking for money?
That's been an incredibly difficult one. We were just talking a little bit before we jumped on here about the fact that our criminal justice system should be, rightly is, walled off from politics. It's walled off from money, right? There are years for which, in my career, I could not accept a cup of coffee, from opposing counsel, right, or for an adverse party, because you don't want that type of influence, right? You have to make sure that the wheels of justice, that the decisions we make as prosecutors are completely independent of any political interest or of any money. And so, yes, a lot of the job translates, right, into politics. A lot of what I've done as a trial attorney, someone who's spent my career in courtrooms and done dozens of jury trials in front of my neighbors and friends, right? Like, I speak to people. That is a part of my job. But a part of my job has never been begging people for money. And that is the most complex transition for me from public service to politics.
I know the perception that a lot of people have, and myself included, is that politically there probably isn't a whole lot of difference between you and Mayor Keller. You're considered a progressive as well. So how would you be different from Mayor Tim Keller?
Sure. I think the labels are interesting for me because I'm a complex candidate, right? There are folks who, and I, as a candidate in a nonpartisan election, which this is, I speak to all people because I think that's important. I think that what's happened in this country is incredibly tragic because we have been told that we are divided amongst these theoretical lines that at the end of the day aren't real, right? And I think there's nowhere where this is more acute than we're thinking about our local municipal elections, right? Sure, maybe on the federal level, there are big theoretical differences and big high-level debates we can have about things. On the city side, we agree on what the problems are. And what the solutions are just empirical questions. What the city should demand of their leaders is not a Republican or a Democrat or a progressive, but someone who's going to get things done, to make a difference that we can feel in this city. And so there's a lot of differences between myself and the mayor. I think he's made decisions that are incredibly costly for us. I think he, allowed an encampment in Coronado Park and then flooded an encampment in Coronado Park. Whichever way you think was the right thing, he did both. And now we're going to pay out in lawsuits and be subjected to supervision for years and years and years that will hamper what we do, right? we've put hundreds of people in a building down on Gibson, to work
Gateway
on
Center.
the Gateway Center, built in the 1950s, full of asbestos, silica, and lead, without first abating it. Right? And there's an Inspector General's report about this. Everyone can go on the website and look it up. It found, as we all know, that a building built in the 50s is full of asbestos, and that maybe we should have tested it before we went in, and maybe we shouldn't have put people in there to work without protective equipment. And so I think, that again exposes us to enormous liability that we're going to be paying out in the millions. And this is taxpayer dollars. This is money we don't get to spend on our parks and our roads, right? And so I think that, I think about the mayor's approach to this city, and I think about what the city and the people here deserve. And part of why I'm running is because people in the city of Albuquerque deserve a mayor who's going to serve them, not his career, right? Not his professional image. They deserve a mayor who is thinking and has their interests first always, who doesn't make decisions that encumber us in these huge lawsuits.
What about policy-wise?
Sure.
How would you be different?
Yeah, and so I think that I believe, like I was talking about, in actual solutions to actual problems, right? So we announced this big, beautiful building down on Gateway. We opened it up. We said it is the solution. It's not, right? We've been in this building for over 5 years, and homelessness has doubled in the past 3. And so solutions that work mean treating the problems and issues that we're facing. Why I came to run for mayor instead of DA or AG is because I saw that the criminal justice system is a solution to some problems, right? We need the deterrent power of quick and effective enforcement to deter people who will be deterred by a prison sentence, right? And that's why we went after public integrity. That's why we went after drug cartels. But for folks who are in the criminal justice system because of poverty or because of addiction or because of mental health, we as a city have a responsibility to provide solutions for those issues too. And so what I would do different is build a way out of the Gateway Center, right? It is not a gateway. People get stuck there. If you've been to West Side Shelter, 600 people, 20% of which have been there for 5 years because they're served by 2 caseworkers. These aren't solutions. This is pushing people around the city and hiding the places where we can't see them, but we've run out of places to hide them. And so what we've learned is we actually need to fix the problems and treat them, and not hide them and not push them around the city from corner to corner. What that means for me on the policy side is transitional housing, right? If you walk the streets and talk to people, or if you lived in the criminal justice system like I have, most people who are on the streets suffer from about 4 afflictions. I mean, there are some serious mental illnesses, there are some serious issues, but the vast majority is anxiety, it's depression, it's PTSD, it's drug addiction. These 4 things we have medical solutions for. We know this because there's many people who are suffering from these afflictions who live in houses and have jobs and families and communities that care about them and meaningful work. They can do that because they have stability and they have treatment. This is a thing we can offer to everyone. It's a thing we should offer to everyone. And if we actually cared about what our city looked like and felt like, if we cared about actually solving this problem, we make an investment in that transitional housing.
All right, we have Alex Uballez, candidate for mayor of Albuquerque, with us. If you have any questions for him, you can send us a text message at 505-243-3333. More with Alex next year on News Radio KKOB. It's 9:26. We continue now with former U.S. Attorney for the state of New Mexico, Alex Uballez, now candidate for mayor as absentee voting gets underway coming up 3 weeks from tomorrow. And Alex, I do have a question here from a listener via text, and I know you talked about, for a municipal election, our leaders need to be focused on solutions and not politics, but someone is wondering, because you were featured in an article by Axios under the title National Spotlight on Progressive Mayoral Races, and they have a picture of you there along with Mandami from New York City. So they want to know, are you, and Mandami openly admits that he considers himself a democratic socialist. Do you consider yourself to be a democratic socialist? He's just trying to get a handle, I think, on, because politics can drive what your solutions are in terms of if you were to become the next mayor. So describe your politics, at least as Axios refers to you as one of the up-and-coming progressive mayoral candidates.
I mean, I'm always honored to be featured in national news. It's a distinction few candidates here have. But I think the labels again are interesting, right? Because if you read that article, there is zero analysis as to why I get grouped into this category other than I'm young and maybe I'm brown and maybe I am challenging a Democratic incumbent who I feel like has not been delivering for the people. But the level of coverage in our political discourse, it sort of dismays me sometimes, right? Because there isn't a discussion of like, oh, here are the policies that make Alex Uballez fall into the same DSA, Democratic Socialist of America category as Mamdani. I'm not a member of DSA. I never have been. I am a member of the Democratic Party.
Sure.
That's how I've always voted. But because of my position, I've actually never been involved in the Democratic Party, right? Which is why they're not coming out in support of me in this election. I'm actually challenging a Democratic incumbent. I'm challenging the fact and the old systems that say what we have to do is support an incumbent because he's always said what we believe are the right things. And so, I think that I believe in personal liberty. I believe in privacy. I believe in basic human dignity. I believe that the strength of love in our families and supports and structure in our communities is the bedrock of everything for a city. And I also believe in why mayoral elections and city council elections and school board elections are so important. I believe that we are in this moment in our nation where we are losing faith in our institutions. I think the greatest threat to democracy, right, is not one party or the other party. I think it's our division, and I think it's our cynicism. And the cynicism is born of that division, is born of being told that me and you, because we're of different parties, we can't share an idea or a room, right? We cannot find alliances and allegiances that solve problems, right? And so for me, the mayoral race has a lot to do with the fact that the people want solutions. They want to stop being told that they're so divided. They want people to actually connect community to one another. Because I think in this moment, the huge tragedy of where we have landed today is our lack of connection with one another. It's not that we're divided, we're not. We all want the same things at the end of the day, right? We all believe we all see the same problems, right? That's the one unifying factor in the past 5 months and the thousands of people I've talked to. Everyone sees the same problems no matter what party they're in. And so for me, it's about the fact that we are not divided, we're disconnected.
So to answer the question he specifically had, are you a Democratic? Do you consider yourself a Democratic Socialist?
No, like I said, I've never been a member of that party. I've
Okay.
never affiliated with them. I know I've been lumped in with this group, and there are ideas I agree with, right? It's not about
Like
the
which
party,
ones?
the party affiliation. I think that our free buses are great. However, I think that our buses are not, right? And so there's, excuse me. I think we have to think with nuance, right? If you've ridden our buses, as my wife and 3 children did yesterday on the Art Line to get to the State Fair, you see that they are not serving the public. We need to fix that. I don't think that means that we need to charge people for it. I think when we charge people, it actually created more violent interactions. But I don't think we're there to the solution yet either, right?
All right, we'll take a break for the news, and we'll have more with Alex Uballez next here on 96.3 News Radio, KKOB. Beat the traffic. It's 9:36 this morning. Bob Clark. We continue now with Alex Uballez, former U.S. Attorney for the state of New Mexico, now candidate for mayor with absentee voting starting 3 weeks from tomorrow. And Alex, I do want to talk a little bit more about crime here with you in just a moment. And plus, we're getting a lot of text questions regarding your position on sanctuary cities. But someone else, they wanted to follow up on the homelessness issue. And you were talking about what you think needs to happen here. But as we do know, I don't know if you can really put a specific percentage on it, but there's a large number of people who are on the streets, and that's where they want to be. That they consider that to be their lifestyle. So even if you got everyone who wants treatment, there would still be a significant number of people living on the streets who are homeless. So how do you deal with those encampments when people over and over again continue to refuse any offers of help of any kind, and basically say, just leave me alone? So what would your philosophy be on dealing with the homeless people who fall into that category?
2 things. I think, first of all, the statistic is misunderstood, right? So if you're talking about 75% of people rejecting help when it's offered to them on the streets, you have to think about what the help is that's being offered to them. If the help is being offered to you, right, you find yourself on the streets tomorrow, and you're given the option, hey, you want to go live in the West Side shelter that used to be a jail? It's 45 minutes out of town. You get to ride a bus back and forth to it. You have no privacy. We inspect you when you come in. Your answer is going to be no. My answer would be no. I'd prefer the freedom of the streets versus the indignity of living there. And so the first piece is we actually need to provide people with dignified, meaningful options that are not a jail cell. The second piece, though, is that doesn't solve for everyone, because you're right. I think this statistic is overblown. But I also think that there is a portion of the population who is that, right? And whether or not, I think we should have a debate and a talk about whether or not that's volitional I think a lot of those folk are suffering from serious mental illnesses, which means that they are not really making volitional decisions on their own. They're not making an economic decision about what's best for them in their life and what they prefer. In those cases, unfortunately, the offer of services may not work.
In those circumstances, do you believe in involuntary treatment?
So I think the option that we have to access this is through the criminal justice system. As you know, the state legislature just passed a $1 billion fund to help fund this thing it's based on the sequential intercept model. It's a program in Miami that works to look at the criminal justice system for access points to finding those people with serious mental illnesses and getting them the treatments using the fact that they're in the criminal justice system, right? There is access to them, right? There is now a touch point between government and them to get them into services. And so that is a component of it, right? So like it is thinking comprehensively about all of the contacts that government has with those who are experiencing serious mental illness, as a distinction from the 4 that we talked about. And how then we identify them and get them services when we can, right? That could be right when they're arrested or at arraignment in court or as they're being detained at pretrial, right? Or as they're serving their prison sentence. And especially one thing that I think we should be thinking about is what happens upon release from whatever sentence it is. One of the things I did as the United States Attorney was I built the first federal reentry court for New Mexico. A reentry court is a program that lets people who've been in federal lockup come back to our streets with the support that they need to not reoffend, to not fall back onto the streets, not fall back into a criminal lifestyle. Because we have an investment once a person has served their time, paid their dues, to help bring them back to our community in a way that's not detrimental to them or to us, frankly. And so I think that we need to use those levers, right, when we have them in the criminal justice system, to identify those people and get them the treatment and services they need. But I think broader, we need to be really thinking what a true offer of services looks like.
With all that said, though, I mean, what about encampments that continue? I mean, would you be willing to enforce the no public camping laws that we have and clear these encampments?
So I think this is a tough question to discuss because we know that clearing the encampments makes it more difficult for people to get off the streets. This is true because every time we sweep a street and we throw away not only people's personal belongings, but their identification cards. They can't get into housing. They can't get jobs. They can't get, basic things that they need to build their life up off of the streets. I walk the streets, every couple of weeks I go out there, central Tennessee. I talk with people who will tell me, hey, this is my cart of things. I spent all day collecting my cart of things because yesterday they threw away my cart of things. Right? If you're constantly in the survival mode of recollecting the things that you need, basic things to survive, right? These are not flat screen TVs. These are not new shoes. This is food and shelter, right? That they have to recollect.
But what about the encampments that are interfering with the public way on sidewalks and streets and causing all kinds of problems for businesses? They have rights too.
Absolutely. And it should not be a burden that the business owner or the homeowner has to bear for the failure of the city. But when it comes down to it, this is a failure of the city to treat the problem. You have to think about the solution that fixes it. Yes, we actually are sweeping the streets 200 encampments per week. It is not making your homelessness problem better, right? It's actually costing a lot of money. It's taking sanitation, it's taking solid waste employees away from doing the real job of keeping our parks and streets clean. It is exposing us to lawsuits, which we will probably lose. And it is recycling a lot of people through a system that doesn't actually change how we feel here, how our streets feel. It doesn't actually make it better for our small business owners, who I talk to all of the time and who say, look, I have the utmost compassion for people, but this is shutting down my business. The problem with sweeping streets, the problem with arresting our way out of this, is it just pushes the problem to someone else's storefront.
All right, well, I'm more with Alex. You will talk crime in sanctuary cities next year on News Radio. 9:45 is the time. We continue now with Alex Uballez, former U.S. Attorney for the state of New Mexico, now candidate for mayor with absentee voting actually starting 3 weeks from tomorrow on Tuesday, October 7th. Not long after that, widespread early voting will start heading up to Election Day on November 4th. And if one of the candidates, and there are 7 candidates for mayor, if one of them does not reach 50% of the vote, there will be a runoff between the top 2 vote getters. Alex, I'm getting a lot of questions regarding this, and obviously as in your career in the federal justice system, people are wondering what your thoughts are on sanctuary city status that we have here in Albuquerque, and I know the mayor just recently, again, in a very detailed executive order, reaffirming our status. He refers to it as immigrant friendly, but when you're basically laying out a case that we are not going to help ICE in any way, not even a phone call, that's providing sanctuary for criminal illegal aliens who happen to be arrested here in Albuquerque. As someone who has worked in the federal side of the justice system, what are your thoughts on that?
I got
on
so many.
us being a sanctuary city.
But let me frame the debate a little bit in terms of my past experience. I'm the only candidate who's ever done immigration enforcement. And so I know, and the only candidate who's led federal investigative efforts. And so I know the power of working with local governments, local police departments, and I did for years, like before I was United States Attorney in investigations and as U.S. Attorney, in close partnership with local law enforcement to solve serious crimes like murders, shootings, bank robberies, human trafficking. These relationships are incredibly important. But I think the question of immigrant friendly, which is what it says in the ordinance, is one of whether we care about the people in our community and whether we're going to take care of our neighbors. As a violent crime prosecutor myself, I know that our cases are built on the strength and the bravery of witnesses and victims coming forward. I think that gets hampered if they are worried about some external civil proceeding before they call the police about the domestic violence that's happening in their home. And so for me, the question is, do people trust their government and police force enough? Do people trust their criminal justice system enough to pick up the phone and call when they're in danger? That is the core value that we have to protect all of the time. And that is, for me, the relationships that I've spent years trying to build with the community. Because without that trust and faith that what we will do is come in and we'll take care of the serious problem you are facing, right? The violence, for example, in a DV relationship, and not some civil enforcement that has nothing to do with it, we're all going to be less safe. We've got to focus our efforts and our limited resources. They're all limited, right? I ran a massive, federal agency, but we didn't have infinite resources, right? So we had to focus them. We should focus them. And we should focus them on building the trust with the community so they'll call, and solving and prosecuting and convicting those cases so we're safer.
So if you're the next mayor, we'll continue to be a sanctuary city as it relates to any communication whatsoever with ICE, even if for someone who's been arrested and has a deportation order.
So we'll continue being an immigrant-friendly city. I know that the federal government has termed us a sanctuary city. I think that their interpretation is wrong. But it doesn't really matter because we're on the list regardless, right? And so I don't think it's worth really having the quibble about the terminology that we use. I will continue to build trust with the community. That is what I will do. I think it's important for us to keep in mind that this isn't about civil enforcement against people who are just here to take care of their families, right? This is about creating a safer community for everybody, and that has to always be our focus.
All right, in terms of the other layers of our crime problem that we have here in Albuquerque, what would you do differently than what the mayor is doing right now?
So on the federal side, what you learn, right, with limited resources is you got to focus them on the most pressing and the worst issues for our city. I think that we have numerous problems in our police department. There's a lot of discussion around the number of officers that we need and what they are doing. There's a lot of discussion about response times, right, and whether crimes are even worth reporting. I think we have to focus our police officers on doing police work. I think they spend a disproportionate amount of their time doing work they did not sign up to do, right? If you're being constantly called out to down and outs, if you're constantly being called out to mental health calls, like this is the reason we ended up in the consent agreement for 10 years. This is the reason why in 2015 the case management order came down from the Supreme Court emptying out MDC, because we were having cops not doing cop work. They were dealing with the social problems that we were discussing before that we need to address as a city before they fall to the criminal justice system. I've worked with APD for 15 years. There are so many great guys in that agency. There are guys who signed up to put their lives on the line, to jump over fences, to put cuffs on murderers, to put their bodies in the way of danger to protect their neighbors. Their morale is low when they spend their career doing things they didn't sign up to do, like be social workers.
Now, if I can tell you, if Mayor Keller if he were sitting right here, right now, he'd say, now, hold on, Alex, we have ACS now, the Albuquerque Community Safety Unit, which responds to down and outs. So our officers don't have to do that anymore. You actually do have some connection with ACS, don't you?
I do. We'll start.
Is it not working?
It's not working.
Okay.
I do have some connections to ACS, and I'll say I'm a big believer in it. I think the theory is the right one. I think when it's funded at $18 million versus the $275 of police, we see that it can't cover the need of the community. Right. I think also when you see the actual practical what they are doing day to day, it is not actually offering services to folks. It is a more analogous to a taxi service for the unhoused as we shuttle them around the city. This is not a solution. This is hiding the problem. And so while I agree with ACS, and in fact, one of my first interactions with the mayor was when we were building a program together when I was a line prosecutor at the U.S. Attorney's Office called the Violence Intervention Program. And so I'm a huge believer in outreach and intervention as a component of what we do. I think public safety is so much more than putting cuffs on people. And it actually makes so much more sense for us if we prevent and intervene and prevent the crime before it happens than if we respond to it. And so, that's why the Department of Justice gave a $2 million grant to the Violence Intervention Program. Right? That's why I was at the groundbreaking for ACS with the shovel. That's why I spoke at their 2-year anniversary. I believe in this idea. But the problem isn't the ideas. The problem is execution. Okay. I'm running for mayor because we actually need to deliver for people.
All right, we'll come back and wrap things up with Alex Uballez next here on News Radio KKOB. All right, our final minute of the show this morning with Alex Uballez, former U.S. Attorney, now candidate for mayor of Albuquerque. And Alex, I know you, along with all of the several other mayoral candidates, tried for public financing. You weren't able to get over the hump. In fact, the mayor was the only one to qualify, $750,000. So you've had to go privately financed and trying to get donations. So for people who want more information on your campaign, if they want to help you in some form or fashion, whether it's donate money or volunteer their time for you, what's the best way to get a hold of that?
Please do visit alexforalbuquerque.com. Your support financially, your support in volunteers, your support in votes means everything to a grassroots campaign that's going up against nearly $1 million of your money being funded into a campaign as supplemented by PAC money from folks who have contracts with the city. And so if you want change in Albuquerque, alexforalbuquerque.com is where you'll find me. I do a virtual meet and greet every single Monday night. You can log on and ask me questions or make fun of me or heckle me. I take all answers. I believe that a government needs to be accountable and transparent.
Very good. Alex, I appreciate you coming on the show today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Enjoy your Monday. The Vince Show is next.